So let me know when I can start. Is it okay? Can we start? Wonderful. So good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Gotland Forum for this second night of discussion. So we will pick up on our conversation of last night, that were intense conversations, to say the least. And this time I would like us to take this opportunity to discuss more concrete ways in which Christians can help inspire people to defend our current civilization in a context of a declining civilization, how creative minorities can help in this process. And we are here in Gotland. It's a symbol of a creative minority, Nordic countries. So I would like us to discuss these opportunities from here in Gotland. There are other creative minorities, but Sweden, like our eminence yesterday highlighted, there is this revival of the Catholic faith here in Sweden. So I would like to start our conversation and ask His Eminence, what are, according to you, the ways in which Nordic peoples, and Sweden in particular, can help their neighbors in Europe, somehow rediscover the strength of their roots and history?
Well, I think it's very important that each single Christian, whether Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, or whatever, is aware that he has a vocation. That being a Christian means that you have the privilege and the joy to transmit something. But then, of course, you have to have your profound roots in the faith yourself. In our diocese, we speak a lot about evangelization, and we are very clear about that we have to evangelize ourselves at first. And I think that's very important in a secular society, that we grow profoundly convinced of our faith, that we study the Bible, that we study our saints, our mystics, so that we can really be able to answer the questions we get. Because as a Christian in Sweden, and especially so as Catholic, you will always get questions. Difficult questions, but sincere questions. Because the situation has changed. Sweden has been a secularized country for so long, and people are bored. They don't find anything that gives them meaning in life, and they are interested not only in Christianity, but religion as such. And there are so many voices on the religious field now. So as Christians, we have to evangelize ourselves, be more aware that we have a vocation to transmit the faith, especially in the families. And that's what we often miss. In families, there are families where the faith is alive, where people speak about God, where they pray together. But many families take for granted that the faith will be transmitted by the parish, sometimes by the school, but the school has nothing to do with Christianity. So it's important that the families realize that they have, I prefer to say a privilege than responsibility, because it's always wonderful to have a privilege. They have a privilege to be an ecclesia domestica, a home church, where they live the faith together, where they encourage each other and help the children to receive the faith. Because when they come to the parish for preparation for First Communion, in Catholic churches, or confirmation in the Lutheran Church, if they have not imbued the faith, it might be too late. Because there are so many other influences. They are overwhelmed by messages, propaganda, for all kinds of things. So if they haven't received already from the beginning at home some idea and hopefully a deep conviction of the faith, it might be too late. So it's important to stress that every single Christian has a mission, a task, a vocation that God wants to use us for the others. And that's also important in individualistic society, where everyone only cares about his own future, his own career, his own money, and so forth. So we have to help those who regard themselves as Christians to realize that they have a vocation and that the church has confidence in them, that the church are eager to help them to become a more evangelizing person. But as I said, you have to start by yourself, you have to be imbued by faith, you have to have a profound prayer life, you have to be very much connected to the sacramental life, you have to be a reader of the Bible, and there, as Catholic, we have to say, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, because so many Catholics don't read the Bible. That's why we published a study Bible for Catholics with commentaries in order to help them to understand the message of the Bible. So that's my first point, that every single baptized person is supposed to be evangelized in order to be able to evangelize.
That's a very interesting point, and we see that your country, Sweden, in Norway, to some degree, like you mentioned yesterday, they kind of saw the very consequences of a highly secularized society, and so somehow they can show the example to the rest of Europe. They see, because these countries are their future, because they are following in their footsteps. So hopefully we'll have the same future and a return to the faith in other countries. Thank you very much, Your Eminence. I think there are some questions from the audience. I have questions here from the internet, but if you have questions from the public here, and I think I was notified that someone had a question. Yes, that's correct. Yes, please.
Hello. I just want to start by saying it's an honor to be here. I've only been a believer since February, so I know that I'm very much out of my depth here. But I hope that this makes sense. And this question also touches on something that you, Your Eminence, touched on here as well. But Mr. Małkowski, you said last night that as long as one man fights for the Latin state, there is hope. In the same way that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet dissident, wrote that one man who stopped lying could bring down a tyranny. And I actually found similar ideas in the Bible as well. As in Genesis 18:26, Abraham actually bargains with God to save Sodom from destruction if only 10 righteous people are found in the entire city. Sweden appears to have become one of the world leaders in dogmatic progressivism, from the acceptance of late-term abortion, a downward spiral of sexual revolution, and an increasingly paganistic worship of Mother Earth. My question is, these are topics that obviously need to be spoken out against, but where should Christians even start? In this atheistic society, are faith-based arguments more likely to be instinctively swept away? Do we need to curate and market these ideas to a secular audience?
Okay. Thank you for your question. In fact, it's a very good question. And I looked for the answer for the same question for me some years ago. What I found was also in the Bible and in the history of first apostles. We need, and my answer is preserving what's important for us and the truth about abortion, etc., etc. We should go out and start building wealth with these people around us, because that's what first apostles did. They go to people to help them. they were not at the very first to teach them. They had to gain their trust at first, because without gaining their trust, they will not listen to us, to our arguments, etc., etc. So that's my answer. And there are many, many ways that we can build wells with them, but we should understand where they are, what they need, and how we can help them. And when we gain their trust, they will start asking questions, and then we will answer them.
Thank you. Maybe one of you has an answer to bring. Father Elias Leyds from EWTN Low Countries has joined us tonight, so he's part of the co-organizers of this event. So he joined us tonight for this discussion. I don't know, Father, if you have an answer to that.
Well, actually, I also don't know where to start, but I think there's a lot of things that have disappeared from the church that reappear elsewhere. And that should be a sign for us. The beads, you know, they appear in other places. The wives of many Muslim men dress up like what we used to see in nuns. I think in society there is an incredible amount of expressions of religion, although they are not recognized as such. Look at the extreme sports. Look at many addictions, which often take a very special kind of idolatry. Those are human experiences where I think we have to tell the people, you're searching in the wrong place. But what you're searching is quite correct, you know. I want to be high also, but I want to be high in such a way that I don't depend on chemicals that will destroy me, you know. An hour in silent prayer, I think it makes you more healthy in a psychological way, and it makes you independent, autonomous with respect to chemistry. So I think we must understand that in society there is an extreme thirst for religion, transcendental experience. We've seen it with all the totalitarian regimes that pretend that man can save himself. They turn into religions, whether it is a manifestation on the Red Square or in Germany, in Nuremberg, but those are religious rituals where a human being has replaced God. So, and I think we must recognize that more and more. I mean, if I see, I haven't been there, but if I see the images of the gay pride in Amsterdam, which is world famous, I just see people conferring themselves in an artificial joy that is in fact an expression of despair. And we should not hesitate in the appropriate place, in the appropriate moment, to say that. This is not a party, this is a collective manifestation of despair. Why do young people need ever bigger parties with ever more medication to make the feast bearable? You know, in the good old days, you had to take some pills after the party when you had been partying too much. Now you take them in advance, because without the pills, without the chemicals, the party is just boring and unbearable. We have to question them. What the hell are you doing?
So true. There is a question here for David Engels. It's related somehow, because so the question is, how can Tolkien, about your speech yesterday, how can Tolkien reawakens the foundations of mystical religious mindset and sacrificial attitude? How can it create the initiation into a mystery which was destroyed by modernity, according to you?
Well, I would say it has never been destroyed totally, of course, because this longing for transcendence is in us somehow. So, of course, the framework can be destroyed, people can be cut off from religion, from transcendence, from ritual, and of course that is what our modern world is doing. From the already birth, is if it is given, it is given under medication. Then we have all these children are delegated to institutions. They are They are absolutely filled in with strange information by YouTube and by schools and whatever. They spend their life partying. There is the problem of drugs and so forth. Even the end of life is happening under the form of euthanasia. So indeed, our modern society tends to make it impossible to have any immediate connection to oneself and to transcendence, which is in the end even the same thing, as we are created after the image, of course, of God. So it is in us, the longing is in us, so this is the good news somehow, that it cannot be destroyed. So of course the fight is doubled somehow. There is on the one hand, I would say, always the possibility that through authors like Tolkien, like Chesterton, like a magnificent piece of music, like one of these splendid churches, a painting, all that can suddenly give to someone who is in search of something, perhaps even not in search of something, this déclic, as they say in French, where suddenly the entire framework changes. So this is of course always a possibility, a sort of moment of grace. But apart from that, of course, we have to work on society, that is sure. We have to ensure that society not necessarily imposes religion on the individual, but at least creates a framework where religion is still present and is not cut off from the human being. But in the end, it remains, of course, a personal choice. So we can do whatever we want. We can bore the kids to death with 12 hours of religion courses in school, but we wouldn't necessarily produce someone who is really near to God. This final step is in the end an individual step that we need to do. There can be outside helps from literature, from the state, but it cannot ever been totally imposed. That is on the one hand the good news and also the bad news, because we can channel somehow as Christians, as politicians, as authors, we can ease a certain path, but we cannot push someone on it somehow. This choice must be a personal one, and so that is of course the good also the good message for the future, because it shows of course that those who want to destroy transcendence, who want to suggest that there is only matter that matters finally, those can never prevail in the end, because they can never eradicate totally the soul of the human being, but they can make our job very difficult, of course, which is what is happening today.
Of course, and you speak about the importance of the individual, and it's true that in the same way as people must be educated for freedom in order to be free, people must be educated for religion and for transcendence in order to really understand what it implies. And you know, Catholicism is a demanding religion. It's not a simple religion. And that's why education is so important. We must be educated to that, to receive this immense gift for our civilization that Christianity is. And so, yeah, I think it's a very, very important point. Thank you, Professor David Engels. I have a question here for Mr. Małkowski, Jacek Małkowski, about your talk about pre-Latin civilization. How to announce the gospel in this context, nowadays context, especially after the communist utopian destruction of human nature?
That will depend where you want to announce this gospel. Because firstly, just as His Eminence said, we should evangelize ourselves. And that's our first task, to rectify our roots, to understand what is, which root is really with and from our civilization and which one are not. And just as I said yesterday shortly, we are not immune to those roots from other civilizations. We should understand that at first and rectify ourselves. If we want to evangelize others, we should understand our faith, our civilization at first. And as a business trainer, I prefer practical approach. Therefore, at the level of our family, we should do it through habits and customs. And I've got even an example. I've invented a so-called evening summary for my family. And we did it for years with our children and with my wife, of course. And it was a custom that every day, 8 p.m., we gathered together to sum up the day. And it was designed by me, and we started with hugging each other. So I sat on the sofa, and I've got my wife on my knee. Then the second, the first child, then the second and third. So we were like just a pyramid of laughter and joy, just for a few seconds. Then we asked each other what was the most important thing from the day. And through this, we learned a lot of very important things from our children. And sometimes we were able to defuse the bomb before it exploded. And, they were really open because we started with laughter, with joy, and everyone can say about the day that just passed. And it was very informative. And then we proceed to reading the Bible for the day and to praying together. That was so natural ending for this evening summary. And of course, it was time consuming, but sometimes it was just like 15, 20 minutes. And I remember one time it was 2 hours, because children came up with very, very important and hard cases. But it was very important for us as a family. And on the level of our communities, habits and customs as well. We should understand what habits, what customs will serve our community, and, to put it bluntly, put them into our calendars. To be together, to talk about things together, to make things together. That will create relationship, and then we can really start evangelizing, because other people will follow.
Very interesting points. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Your Eminence, maybe? Would you like to add anything about
Well,
this?
it was a very encouraging example to see that a family has found a kind of ritual, kind of rhythm where they come together. Because that's what we see, that in many families, they don't come together. Everyone goes to the fridge and takes something to eat. They don't come together for meals. They don't come together for prayers. And on Sunday, the children have more to do than the grown-ups, going to all kinds of things. So it's very important to form good habits and holy customs. And that's what we do in a monastery. And the family is a kind of, well,
Small
if
monastery.
you like, a small little monastery where they live together under God's protection and try to build up a community. And that could also happen in a parish, that we form these habits. In Sweden, we have an ecumenical discussion. In the Lutheran tradition, there are 2 sacraments, in the Catholic 7, but we have a so-called sacrament in common, the church coffee. Is that the 3rd sacrament or the 8th sacrament? Well, that's a friendly dogmatical discussion.
Very important.
Yes, and I ask people, what do you speak about when you come for church coffee after Mass? Do you speak about the weather or where the sausages are cheap? Or do you speak about the faith? Do you speak about your experience? So it's very important that we as Christians can speak about the faith, how God is present in our everyday life, because that's where we have to find God. Not only 1 hour at Sunday Mass, Everyday life is so important. So that's why I wrote a book called Vardagsmystik, the mysticism of every day. Because
Exactly.
If we can evangelize the ordinary day, things will happen. So it was a very wonderful example to hear about that family. And we could do something similar.
That's an idea. Father Elias, do you have something to add?
Well, I agree. A religious community is like a family, with all the pros and contras. But I think that's it's very important, and I think that for the re-evangelization of our countries and everywhere anyway, the family is of crucial importance. Because in a family, you don't have to prove your existence. Whereas in the society today, you often have to prove your right to exist. You know, it's good to have to demand from each other certain things. We grow together, but there must be a very basic acceptance of our simple existence. And there's a lot of people who are not lucky enough to have known this. You know, the family is suffering a lot. Of course, divorce is no longer a plague, it's part of the culture. But to have two faithful parents that respect each other, that love each other, or that try to love each other until the end, that's an incredible gift of God. And it's maybe the greatest treasure of our tradition that we have to find back again. Because if there's one thing that Christianity has brought everywhere, is the respect for the family as God originally wanted it to be. And the fact that we are losing that everywhere in the Christian world means that we have really lost the roots of our spiritual life.
Yeah, indeed. And it made me think that I wanted to ask you a question, Mr. Małkowski, about your talk yesterday, because we're speaking about civilization, and it makes me think, yesterday you say how a civilization can be destroyed, what makes a civilization, and you had this classification of civilizations. And yesterday we had to close our conversation, but I wanted to ask you, so Nordic countries, in which category would it fall into? And then, you know, the rest, because you mentioned the fact that it's not only geographical, but I wanted to pick up on that conversation and ask you to precise your thoughts.
Okay. Yes, at first it was geographical, of course. So the Byzantine civilization started in Byzantium. Latin civilization started in Europe, where the Latin language was present. The Turanic civilization came with the deep steppes of Asia. Right now, it's much more mess, to say so. We should observe where our countries and societies go, which rules and roots, civilization roots, they follow. From my point of view, most of the modern world, I mean almost whole of the Europe and United States as well, goes into Byzantinic civilization, where the state is omnipotent, where one person has minimum impact. And there goes tyrannic civilizations from the east. And Russia is fine example for very tyrannic civilization. But what's very important, there are no more just one pure civilization in one country, because they are all mixed up, and that's the problem. Because when the country has mixed up civilizations, there are different roots in one place. Therefore, as Professor Koneczny said, how can we achieve anything that will last if we cannot agree how many legs a horse has? And there are, of course, much more important questions. What's good, what's wrong? What if large part of society says abortion is right and another part says abortion is wrong? Those are different roots from different civilizations. And I think that's the point right now to, I think we should focus on our own country at first and understand where are those, where our country goes and in which direction and with which routes, and then try to rectify those routes, working with people. But it's easy to say, of course.
But we'll ask our historian here, the Professor David Engel, to react on that, to have his view.
Yeah, we do have a friendly dispute, we could say, on this notion of civilization, because we agree absolutely on our love for Tolkien, but I think we present a little bit different philosophical traditions, because you are coming from Konečné, I'm coming from Spengler and Toynbee, and so of course the approach is very different. And so I myself, from a Spenglerian point of view, would somehow not necessarily agree to this categorization, because even if you look at classical antiquity, you see that it is all but a purely Latin civilization, because already Sparta is the absolute contrary to any form of personalism and freedom. But the Roman Empire is certainly a Byzantine, by Byzantine state somehow that is really state-focused, and that where the personal power diminishes more and more. And there are also Turanian phases in classical antiquity. I mean, Athens, at the height of its power, was absolutely a brutal state. And of course, in late antiquity, the Roman Empire transformed also in an empire that wasn't anymore a state, but finally some form of Turanian, could say, or Turanic dominance. And the same can be said, I think, for all civilizations. So from my point of view, I would rather see in these three models, that is the accent on the personality, on the state, or on pure power, rather psychological archetypes that exists in every civilization. I wouldn't call them themselves civilization. I think there is a thing like a Greco-Roman civilization, a Chinese civilization, a Western civilization, a Russian civilization, and of course they have their ups and downs, but I think that these traits of characters are distributed everywhere. And what is even more, we could perhaps even say that every civilization has an evolution where at a certain point a freedom-centered society transforms step by step in a state-centered society that in the end becomes a pure power-based society. So that we have these, so that it would be rather my approach to this Konečné element, and I would say that all three are also compatible in some ways and have their problems also with religion, because a purely freedom or personality-based society can also be a big issue and big problem for religion, because religion is in a certain way also the realization that we have partly to abandon our personality, our being, myself, in order to gain access and to fill ourselves with God and to become truly ourselves through God. So a purely personalized or personalizing society can be very a big problem for that. And of course we can see different problems also with state-based and power-based. So I wouldn't say that there are necessarily some that are absolutely a better approach towards transcendence than others. I would rather see in these types some, not all, of the potential psychological archetypes that characterize every human being, that are present in all civilizations. So I think that the word civilization may be a bit mistaken when we address these three types, rather archetypes perhaps that coexist and shape civilizations, but that are not perhaps identical to them. But that is of course my Spenglerian approach. Yeah. So you are not, I guess you are not surprised by that remark. We had already that discussion.
Yes, that's right.
Well, if you want to answer, you can.
Just shortly, we had this discussion previously.
Joe barbecue.
And, yeah, as David said, he sees these things through Spengler, and I would rather stick to Konieczny. And as a business trainer, those psychological archetypes I can see all my day long when I work. And I still really believe that those archetypes comes from those civilizational roots. And that was very crucial for Konieczny to say that civilizations doesn't mix. I mean, they can be mixed up, but they don't sum up. And if there are things from one civilization, and they cannot sum with things with the other civilization. And there is a difference on those axioms, because we are talking about axioms. Some of them cannot go together. Different things are about the culture, the upper level, this what is visible, and some culture artifacts from different civilization can coexist, but axioms cannot. And this is Konieczny's approach.
And so yes, and if I understood your point correctly, you also mentioned the fact that the historically Latin civilization, geographically Latin civilization has lost the aspects that made her Latin civilization, and you think that it has become closer to a Byzantine civilization. So because of this, its relationship to power. Mm-hmm. So for you, basically, this Latin civilization as it used to exist, it no longer exists nowadays?
That's my point. I don't think that Latin civilization, as it was in Europe for ages, it doesn't exist anymore. It still exists somewhere here in our hearts. And of course, we can still, as a personalism says, we can still fight for it and regain it, but it will take time.
What do you think, Father Elias?
I'm not aware of all these theories of civilizations, although it's fascinating. I would just like to add, I see another sort of cultural drift, which is important since all those, let's say, the universal civilization that came to us from the East through Greece and Rome, it was like completed by Christianity. We see many things of that civilization incorporated and baptized, if you like, in Christianity. But what strikes me is that as soon as you have a civilization that is Christian and therefore that is like structured by the Logos, the Word of God that became flesh, you get a very strange new competitor appearing, which is gnosis. The idea that man, first of all, can have complete knowledge, whereas incompleteness is one of the characteristics of Logos, because the Word is open towards the Father, towards the future, what will the Holy Spirit do? But Gnosis wants to have complete knowledge and thinks that this complete knowledge can save humanity. There's no more talk about the soul, but there's just the knowledge. And of course, because it gets a bit sort of dominated by imagination and by aesthetics, there will be a moment, I think the Americans say the chicken come home to roost, the chicken come home. So there will be a return to reality. So whereas Gnosis seems something like the ideal intellectual aim of human life, there is a return to reality, and that's very often totalitarian regimes, utopia, or materialism without morals, you know. So I think the tension in our society within, whether it's two civilizations or two cities, you know, St. Augustine talks about that, or the struggle that God gives to our civilization until his return, I think this this dichotomy, if you like, between the gnosis and the logos. It comes every age with a new form, but basically it's the same thing. And it can be esotericism, which is only for the elite, Freemasonry is a form of esotericism, where you cannot choose freely a public teaching, but you are being chosen for the sake of a secret teaching. But of course, my own brand, the technocrats, I mean, I'm an engineer, and although it's public, we think, or we may think, we can be tempted to think that our technology gives the complete and total version of reality, and therefore it gives us the right to change reality according to our plans. But so it can have many forms, but it is this tension between the gnosis, the knowledge, Gnosticism, and the logos, whereas Christ is the incarnated logos, who never lets himself be dominated, but gives us the choice to answer to a heavenly Father the way he did, and to do it inspired by a love that I can never understand, because it's God's own love. So we can always grow. There's every new day is a new day. And I think the spiritual life is actually the fight, never to fall into the trap of gnosis, but to become more and more a friend of the incarnated Word of God.
Thank you. So it looks like we have other questions from the public. Yes? Yes, please.
My name is, like this, is Lotta Miskelt, and I'm a Swedish woman. And I'm not agreeing all the way to how you describe Sweden now. I don't know if you agree with my thoughts, dear Bishop Anders, but it's not so fantastic as it sounds in comparison with other European countries. What is fantastic is that we start now from scratch as a Catholic Church. There are no more prejudice or interests or perhaps a longing, of course, for transcendence. But the generation of mine and the after me were very negative to religious dogma and rules and churches and like that. But now they are getting older and disappearing more and more. So the young people are not so negative. But when I go abroad, for example, to Germany or to England, I can feel more secure as a Christian, or it's more natural to be a Christian in those countries abroad, because they know what it means. They have, the tradition is more impregnated with Christianity, even if persons are not so active. But it's really a difference. And in Sweden you can't even talk, the intellectual standard is not so high. You can't talk about, perhaps, I don't know if you agree, Bishop, you can't talk about abortion in Sweden without being looked upon as a medieval person or idiot or something. You can't talk rational about those things with respect. It's failed. This respect is failing, and that's not nice to live in a country like that somehow. So we have really both sides. It's a very homogene country, Sweden. Homogene, because the people writing in the papers and other intellectuals, they are afraid to have other opinions than the majority about religion. And as an example for how my generation is reacting, I invited my neighbors in my house. It's a house with 20 flats. Because I was newly I just came there and I wanted to know them. And when they saw my crucifix hanging on the wall, they got so afraid of me. And that wouldn't have happened, I think, in a European country, another country. But it took very many days or years or months to get some understanding about me as a person because of this crucifix.
Yes, it's very clear. I think the debate was actually the fact that the situation went so bad in Sweden and Nordic countries in general that it's a starting point for a renewal. And so that's I understand completely your point. And what we see in this very difficult context, we see seeds of hope in the midst of this difficult context. And no one is saying that the situation is easy in Sweden, on the contrary, but we are very interesting, in seeing what is going on in Sweden and see somehow a return, even if it's slow and it's a process, but we are trying to understand the process. And so I will let His Eminence react to that.
Well, of course, that's the question we always have, that somehow we often feel that we are aliens here as Christians, as Catholics. We feel that people have no idea what it is, a crucifix. It's a bit easier with Our Lady, because a friendly woman can hurt no one. But I think it's very important to realize, if we speak about civilizations, there are two civilizations. We have this secular world where crucifix and faith is something strange, something from another planet. But at the same time, we see that underneath this secular atmosphere, something is growing, something is happening. Not all of us will see it, of course. And I would say that if you live more with non-Swedes, the immigrant generation, you will feel that something new is happening in Sweden. But the problem is that Swedes and immigrants don't meet so often. We have many mixed marriages, and that's a very interesting thing to see. I would take an example. We have thousands of Filipino women who have married Swedes. Some of them come through internet. Some of them come to a very difficult situation where they are badly treated, they are not allowed to go to church, and so forth. But some of them come to those, timid, a bit shy, a man who hasn't found a woman. And some of them have been able to show the kingdom of God to these men. They are ordinary Swedes, they have no idea about religion, about nothing. But through the love of this woman, they have received the light of Christ. So there are these little signs of hope in Sweden. But it is true, we have to be realistic. We live in a civilization where God is not known. But He knows the civilization. He can enter into all those kinds of civilizations. And that's what we also see here. We shouldn't be naive and think that everyone will open up. But we see those seeds of faith that are being born. I've heard the same question, the same issue. A mother who told me that when her daughter invited friends, she said, take away all the crucifix, all the icons from the walls, because otherwise I will be looked upon as strange. So we have a paradoxical reality here. We have this secular and this growing interest in religion. And we don't know what will happen in the next generation. Will it be easier to be a Christian? I meet all kinds of journalists in Sweden, and I always say the young ones are much easier to cope with. The older ones have all those prejudices against religion and Catholics and so. But the young ones, they don't know anything. But when they see this, oh, it's cool to see someone like this. So you're right. We have this secular, difficult situation, but we also have something else popping up.
Of course. And I think your input in Sweden is enormous because of your openness to immigrants and to the Swedish church. I think that's why you can talk so positive about Sweden, because you are doing a fantastic job. And I think one of the most important things with immigrants is giving the parents of the first generation's parents confidence, give them confidence that they are good parents, they are important parents. Because to live with parents that the state or the surroundings, society look down on, because they are peculiar there, or they have strange habits bringing with them. So that's so dangerous and so sad. So giving those parents a confidence is very important in Sweden now. I think Sweden is not very open for different thinking or different living.
But I think in the next generation, Sweden will be so mixed that there will be less prejudices between immigrants and Swedes. We already can see that in some areas among young people, that somehow they don't think, is he Swede or and things like that. So I think still we have to be hopeful, we have to be realistic at the same time, and that's not always so easy to combine, because we believe that Christ is at work even in a secular society. Even there can be an opening up for religion. And that's my hope.
And to wake curiosity for Catholicism is very important. That people get curious about how can they live like that? How can they be like that? So we have to be real good examples in respect to each other. I think.
Thank you for your comment and question. Thank you very much. Is there any other question from the public?
I would like just to make a question for my guests today. We are here in Visby in the museum, surrounded by picture stones that actually are picture stones that showing us the testimony of the Christian faith in this land. Some of those picture stones has more than 1,000 years. And today, the Catholic Church is celebrating the memory of San Januario, who, the time of the Diocletian's persecution, was killed and become a martyr. Also in my family, in the Middle East, I have 5 martyrs. Also, all of those lives and the situations and what is surrounding us here are showing that we have the testimony of our faith. So my question is how the Nordic countries nowadays, especially for Europe, especially during the time where the Catholic Church is living the synod time, how they can be an example, a testimony also for the next generations, especially seeing the influence of the immigrants from the Byzantine rites that we have more than 14 in Catholic Church, and also from Alexandria and from Antiochia, how the Nordic countries can have an important role, at least for the next generation, in facing the importance to us to testimony our faith and to grow up our faith personally and also in our society surrounding us. Thank you very much.
Very tough question. Would you like to answer, Your Eminence?
It's for me?
If it's for everyone, maybe
For
everyone will have a word to say. If you want to react or not, it's.
Well, we also have to be a bit humble here in the Nordic countries. We cannot teach anything to others, but we can give some little hints. And I think we have a lot of contact with the Catholics in Germany. And sometimes we are a bit honest and tell them things that they are maybe don't like so much to hear. But what we try to say is that we have to rely upon that Jesus Christ is the truth and that in him we will find all the answers. We need to listen to him, and we need to see that the church is always the bride of Christ. The personal relationship with Christ is the essential thing, that we grow into ever deeper relationship with him. And that we also become a church where everyone is welcome. That we have open doors and open hearts for those who come. I have met so many how many immigrants who have never been invited to a Swedish home. And that's something we have to teach all Europe. And that's what the Holy Father is always pondering upon. That we are not allowed to build up these walls against people coming from the other side of the Mediterranean. We have to be a more open society where we receive people as Christ would have received them. Of course, this is a very tricky question, many political implications, but the main issue is that we have to form a church where everyone is welcome, where people of all nationalities and social backgrounds can build up a community. And that's what we do in many countries, but we have to be reminded of this issue because there are also voices from Christians that want to, make it more difficult for people to come to our countries. And so I would say two issues: a more spiritual, profound life in unity with Christ, and a really universal church. Those are the little, it's nothing new, nothing special, but those little hints may something we could try to give to the Synod.
Thank you. Professor David Engel, you wanted to react as well.
Yeah, just very shortly. Of course, I'm not at all a specialist in the Nordic countries, so I wouldn't like to dabble with saying, well, this is particularly for Sweden or not for other countries. From what I know, I see that Sweden is, of course, in a very similar situation in comparison to most of the other more continental nations, because there is, on the one hand, the loss of faith, which is massive. On the other hand, there's, of course, also the issue of immigration from non-European, very often also non-Christian countries. And so the question is, of course, and perhaps the main difference between Sweden, perhaps also Denmark and the other countries, is that this evolution, at least when it comes to mass migration, is of course much more recent here in Sweden than in France, for example, where this phenomenon is taking place for at least 50 years, even more. So that could be a major difference, perhaps. But I think that the answer to that issue is, of course, double, and exactly as St. Augustine already knew it, that we are at the same time citizens of the civitas caelestis, but also of the civitas terrena. And so when it comes to the divine citizenship that we have, then of course our enemy, if we can talk in terms of enemy, is of course the absence of transcendence. That is of course the major enemy, if you wish. So the fight against this temptation of pure materialism and of forgetting our own divine soul and just concentrating on hedonism and so forth. So this is one terms of the battle, and from that point of view, of course, the major enemy, once again, if we want to speak in terms of spiritual warfare, is of course the entire woke movement that in the end leads to this void, this emptiness, and that becomes more and more obviously a gnosis movement that is just constructed finally on this ground. So that is one, I would say, one battleground. And from that point of view, of course, other religions that try to find their approach towards transcendence, like Islam, can be allies partly, because at least we share the belief that there is one God, that society, that family, that also duties like love and so forth. That is something that we have in all religions. I'm simplifying, I know, of course, there are major differences, but still, from that point of view, all religions have this common opposition towards materialism, wokeness, hedonism, and so forth. So that is one battleground. But it's not the only one. The other is, of course, the more civilizational. We are also citizens of a certain civilization, of a certain civilizational model. And I think it is also absolutely correct and I think justified if people in Europe, in Sweden, in France, in Germany, in Poland, whatever, want to conserve a certain civilizational model against the fact that in a very short time, suddenly we have people from other civilizations that are more and more taking over many parts and that have changed very drastically certain cities. Like if you think in the UK, in a very short time, finally most of the major cities have a non-European population majority. That is an extreme transformation, of course, of the European societies. And I think that also from the point of view of the civitas terrena, it is also a justified fight if we want to protect and to conserve a certain civilizational approach and saying this is a country in which we are rooted for generations, for centuries, for millennia sometimes, and that we do not want necessarily to see it transformed through other civilizational paradigms and patterns that are imposed and that are very often at odds with the original ones. So I think this is the double fight that especially a country like Sweden now with this very rapid increase also of Muslim minorities is currently having to somehow to fight. How can we remain or become again Christian, and how can we reassert to a certain degree also our civilizational identity that many people are also afraid of losing, and that leads also to all these major strives, and we see that these strives are very quickly becoming violent. Think about Paris, think about France just a month ago after the killing of Nahel. So this shows that this is a real question that needs to be addressed and that will pose huge challenges in the next years in Sweden and elsewhere. I think this is this double standard or double question we shouldn't forget. There's the civilizational and the religious sphere that partly overlap but not entirely, and we have duties to both.
You're very right. You say in Sweden and elsewhere, and thinking France, my country, according to all the recent studies, will be within the next 30 years, Islam will become the first religion. It's the eldest daughter of the church. So this question is extremely urgent, indeed, extremely important. And so thank you for raising that aspect too. I don't know if our other speakers would like to react on that, or shall we go to another
Well, I know that this whole question of migration is in fact very complex, because I see people who say, oh, we have to welcome them and we have to be nice to them, but they invite them into their shop, but there's nothing in the shop. I mean, what do we offer them? They left a country, and to leave your country you don't do for fun. There must be reasons why they left the country, why there are structural things that they experienced as evil that they had to run away from. And it doesn't have to be war, it can just be the corruption or a very sort of blind power structure. They left. Are they aware of what they're choosing positively? Here, do we propose something to them? And so that question actually immediately means we have to ask questions about our identity. So on the other hand, you see the rather shapeless, I would say thoughtless way of saying, okay, everybody who wants to come here, come, because it's so awful in your country. But I think we should ask a question, if it's so awful, why couldn't you do anything about it? Because, the Dutch people that fled the German occupation they came back to free the country. And so everybody has a certain vocation in the country where he's born. Now the thing is, on the other hand, the people that are less open and that criticize, they often claim to protect a certain identity that we must protect, that they've actually lost. So you see this infighting between, let's say, the conservatives or the new right or the new neocon or whatever you can call them, that, you know, oh yeah, we have to go back to correct the French Revolution. And the other will say, no, we have to go back to the original Reformation and the new freedoms that brought us. And others will say, no, we have to go I don't know, even further back. So there's great disagreement because there's lots of people who want to protect a culture, a civilization or whatever, but they haven't got a clue of what the sources of that civilization was. What did those ancestors of ours give their lives for? Now, I think if I look at this personally, I see this confusion around me. I say one thing that's coming up. The ultimate form, not of proving who is Jesus, but of demonstrating it. The ultimate testimony of testimony. Sorry, Christians, we're all in the same ship. It's martyrdom. And the confusion within our own society and within the societies that people come from to flee to my country is at the moment such that I think part of our Christian life is to prepare for martyrdom. And as long as we want to escape to that, for example, I've had in the sports group quite some contact with Muslims. And there are some aspects which I like, although it's unpleasant. But when you discuss religion or think about it with them, about religion, in fact, there's a very important question. Do you want peace because you're scared of war? Or do you want peace because it's a higher state of being than war? And if you ever can demonstrate to them that peace is a higher state of existence than war, then you're talking. I lived in the Caucasus, in the extreme south of Russia, Muslim territory. I go to the market with my funny clothes, and I get from some adolescents, I get the question, are you an Wahhabite, which means Muslim extremist? Because I had a beard at the time, so it was very convincing. But I said, no, look, I'm a Catholic priest. So they say, should we cut off the head of all Catholics or Christians? I said, go ahead, we go to heaven straight. I got a couple of handshakes, I got a drink and a nice discussion about things divine and less divine, but it was their challenge to meet me. And we must be prepared to that. Because if we how to say, try to get away from that, we are actually forgetting that our ancestors gave their lives to transmit something which we call tradition, but we're not going to conserve that. We're not going to keep that. We have to make it fertile again. And God will challenge us to do that, I think. And it might be in an extreme way. It will always be an unexpected way.
There are different types of martyrdom, let's
of
say
course.
that. Maybe we don't have to be beheaded to
living together with other brothers, I think you would agree, comes very close.
Are there some other questions from the public?
I'm interested in the question as a philosopher of truth, you know, how real society relates to truth. And I think in our society it's usually said democracy is a value, is considered as a value, and that truth would oppose this democracy or concepts like tolerance. I think I would say, you know, what is about, you know, trying to emphasize or to promote, you know, a real understanding what truth really means as a precondition of the respect for human rights instead of a relativism. I think we are often, you know, discussing these things very much, and I think our societies are much more alike because there's a wrong concept maybe of truth, so in terms of, you know, you have to impose the truth on others. And so I just want to, would be interested in, you know, how can we kind of reveal or show also the self-contradiction of society, because you need to accept the truth, truths in the plural, in able to live, and we have some very extremely self-contradiction in the German society, for example, that you can, if you deny, for example, the historical fact of the Holocaust, you can get into jail, or at least, you know, so there is, even in history, there are objective truths. What is the way to promote this, to at least, I don't know, reveal again the truth, the objectivity, and yeah, something that's a question, you know, into society, how to explain what truth really means and how important it is as a precondition for human rights and and human dignity.
Who would like to answer that tricky question? Professor Engels?
Because I wrote that book a bit on that subject, what is to be done. And of course I don't have an answer to that, but or complete answer to that, but it is clear that our current political, mediatic, cultural situation as being Christians, as believing in transcendence, is so weak that of course it is difficult to demonstrate the importance of truth from top down, because we are not top down. We can't explain anything down, because we are already down finally. So the only way of explaining and of demonstrating truth is by our example. I think that the easiest way, I mean, we are so discredited in society, we're so reviled, all the much parts of the media are against us, Wikipedia, the internet, whatever we do, all positions that are trying to bring in against the idea of truth and of transcendence into everyday life are already considered as extremist, fundamentalist, and whatever. But I think that is the price we have to pay. That is our martyrdom. In a certain way, we have to convince by our example. We have to try to live these lives in truth by ourselves. We have to try to emanate what follows from this inner conviction. We have to live it through the family, through our working environment, through the societies and the little families and groups we build, through our religious communities. I think we really have to start in large parts again from scratch. And I think that the comparison in some points with the early Christians, who also finally convinced the entirety of the Roman Empire only by their example, by their sincerity, by their immediateness, by the immediate emanating of their special, let's say, conviction in transcendence. That is something that becomes more and more actual again. And of course it implies, and I'm absolutely with you, it implies ultimately the readiness to pay the highest price. And if you are not ready to do that somehow, and it doesn't mean that one has to look for martyrdom, because of course already the early Christians knew that it is sin of looking for martyrdom or provoking the Roman provincial governor to kill you. That is of course not the way to do. So that is something that is very different, of course, from the Muslim approach. But if we are not ready to pay with everything, that if our faith is not strong enough that we are ready to leave it all, finally, to demonstrate that for us truth with a big T is more important than all the rest, then we will not be able, of course, to convince others that we are not playing in the same league, that we are in another world, that we are living in another world, and that another world whose access has been cut in large parts, as we said, by the powers that are, and we have once again to demonstrate what it means to be part also of that world. I think we can only convince by a radically personalist, a radically personal example.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. Is there any? Oh. Okay, we have one.
Something I discuss with friends of mine is, as Christians, looking not just to the present, but also to the future. And I always throw out a number, the year 2050. So I know that in the present discussions that we've been having, we've been talking a lot about tradition, about the past, present challenges, but also good signs here in Sweden too. But if we look to the future, and we say, what does a civilization look like in, let's say, 30 years? That, not to say it's a Christian civilization, but a civilization where Christians are welcome and they see that they can thrive. What do you think that looks like? Or maybe it's not the case where we just have to accept that Christians will not be accepted at all in the future. Maybe it's better for us to live the faith not being welcome and just to be martyrs. What do you envision for a society 2050, if that helps?
Anyone to answer that question?
It's really hard to answer this question. From my point of view, our Christian civilization is in a very strong decline. And I think it will be more and more of this. And we should be prepared for this. And it doesn't matter, it doesn't mean it won't change in some moment, but we don't know for sure and we don't know when. So for now, again, from my practical and pragmatic approach, I'm trying to do my best with myself, with my family, with my community, hoping for the best, and be prepared for martyrdom if it comes. So that's my view.
Oh, we have one last question.
Yes, I've been teaching in biology, and then science is the truth. And religion is something that was in past times. And we can see even here in the museum that everything about the Catholic faith is in past form. It was something that was during medieval times and so on, but not anymore. And before we had religion, and the immigrants they have a bit religion also. But as modern Swedish people, we have science. This is what my colleagues at the school also say. So they cannot understand how I can be teaching biology and at the same time have the Catholic faith. So my question is to you, how could we avoid to be marginalized, like some Bishop Cardinal has also mentioned about this marginalization always, that the religion is something past form, something that was before, or something that is a bit strange things that the immigrants are doing.
Well, I think, if I may answer, one of the things I see happening before my eyes is that there's all sorts of forms of idolatry that are just crashing at the moment. Whether it's the virtual money, whether it is Marxism that fell apart. I think our financial system will just blow up because it's virtual money. I don't believe in artificial intelligence. I think the word is already incorrect. You can have artificial reason, but we've had that for ages. What you put in is what you get out. So there will always be the human escape from something that is too closed. The little bird will always find something sharp in his snail that makes him leave the egg. It's too far into us. We shall not and will never be closed up in our own human nature. There's this instinctive reaction. And we must recognize it and then be ready to call with Christ. It's like the new... We don't just have Jesus in our heart, we have John the Baptist in our heart. And we know he's a bit of a rough guy, you know, not easy to live with. You don't give a retreat on marriage giving the example of John the Baptist as the ideal husband, you know? But he's the friend of the bridegroom. So I think we must detect in our society, wherever, whether it's the migrants or the people who have never left Gotland, we must detect this mechanism where people want to leave the cocoon. They don't want to be locked up. They want to deal with death in a direct way, with our temporal existence. And I think we can see that all over the place. But we must not be scared of the things that other people are adoring as gods. Whether it's the gensec of our party, whether it's the computer, whether it's another form of technology, or complete. I have this is a public forum. I don't know what, you know, idiots, let's say, who believe that we will go on holiday on Mars. You know, I think we have to be realistic. I mean, one of the funniest things that happened recently, which really gives me hope, is that Richard Dawkins, who is not very intelligent, but he has sense of selling things. So he has sold his atheism, made a lot of money with it. He actually now believes in fairy tales. I think it's the first step towards something more useful, because he believes that the people from other galaxies that are visiting us will eventually give us better programs for our artificial intelligence. I think it's a fairy tale, but I must say I'm a bit disarmed by his young, refound faith in other realities than what is in his own head. Very hopeful step. I want to encourage him to continue reflecting, you know.
I would add two things. First relates to the previous question about the truth. Truth by small t. I always go back to Aristotle, and when someone asks me about what the truth is, I simply say the truth is when our opinion is aligned with facts. And it's simple and it's short, easy to remember. And when they ask about the facts, that's where we can start talking. And concerning the relation between science and Catholic faith and Catholic Church, I simply say to the amusement of people, modern science, as it is in the best meaning of this word, was built by Catholic Church. And I've got massive arguments for them if they are eager to hop into and read them.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, it's already time for us to conclude our discussion, but it was very insightful. Thank you very much to everyone. Your Eminence, thank you very much, Father Leyds, Professor Engels, Mr. Małkowski. We all, you know, we are the Gotland Forum. We are here in Sweden, but we represent Europe in a very efficient way. We represent different countries of Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, and France. We have different ideas, but we are all united by our common faith and our mutual civilization. And I think it's very crucial for us to have this kind of forums in order to study our commonalities and in order to be more to get new and more efficient tools to defend what we have. And like you said, not only defend, but make it fertile again. And yes, so our Gotland Forum is representing the current reality of Europe, and we are very happy about that. Thank you again so much to Ulfa Silfverling for having this idea of the Gotland Forum. Thank you to all those who helped organize it. Fabio Lufti, sorry, and Susanna, and the whole technical team. Thank you very much to all, and it has been a pleasure for me to host this conversation. Good night, everyone. And I will just remind to all those who are present that there is a possibility to take a picture in front of the Golden Wall, because we are in this lovely context of the Visby Museum. And so for those who want to do that, you can have a special picture here. Thank you again very much. Have a lovely evening and good night.
Thank you.